Welcome to the world's most secure prison, ADX Florence, where freedom ends and isolation begins. Every new inmate enters a system designed to break and reshape their mind before they even take a step into their cell. If you want to uncover the secrets the government doesn't want you to see, hit that subscribe button and join us as we reveal the unseen indoctrination inside America's Supermax. The Arrival. First steps into ADX Florence. The first sight of ADX Florence is a stark, almost surreal moment. From the air, the prison looks like a fortress carved from the barren landscape of Colorado's San Luis Valley. A sprawling compound of concrete walls, razor wire, guard towers, and perimeter fences stretching as far as the eye can see. But for the inmates stepping off the bus, there is no time to admire the view. What awaits is not just confinement, but an indoctrination process meticulously designed to strip away individual identity, enforce compliance, and establish a hierarchy of psychological control that begins the moment they arrive. New inmates are transported from federal prisons across the country in small, heavily secured buses. Often, they have already faced years of isolation, discipline, or exposure to the criminal justice system, but nothing compares to the rigidity of ADX. Upon arrival, guards already know the inmates' backgrounds, affiliations, and perceived risks. Every step is choreographed. The order in which inmates exit the bus, the placement of their hands, even the angle of their gaze is directed to minimize resistance. The intake process begins immediately. Inmates are led into a sterile intake center, stripped of personal items, and subjected to a thorough search. Personal belongings are cataloged and clothing is replaced with prison-issued attire. For some, this is the first time they've been completely divested of personal identity. In interviews, former ADX inmates recall the unsettling feeling of being reduced to a number, a psychological recalibration before they are even placed in their cell. Next comes a comprehensive orientation that could be described as both educational and intimidating. Guards brief new arrivals on the facility's rules, schedules, and expectations, but the message is heavily laced with warnings about the consequences of defiance. A single violation, no matter how minor, can result in extended isolation or other punitive measures. Former inmates describe the briefing as a slow, deliberate exercise in fear and control. The messages are not only verbal, the environment itself reinforces the severity of every word. Stark fluorescent lights hum overhead, steel doors close with an audible, almost menacing clang, and surveillance cameras track every movement. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of this indoctrination is the early introduction to social isolation. New inmates are initially placed in highly restrictive units where contact with other humans is minimal and communication is controlled. Meals are delivered through slots in the cell doors, recreation occurs in solitary cages, and the outside world is almost completely cut off. The psychological intent is clear. By isolating inmates from familiar social structures, ADX conditions them to respond primarily to institutional authority. Medical and psychological assessments are another critical step. Every new inmate undergoes extensive screening to identify potential vulnerabilities, mental health concerns, and behavioral tendencies. Psychologists and correctional officers document every response, every hesitation, and every indication of defiance. This information is not merely for observation. It becomes a blueprint for the inmate's management, including potential cell assignments and restrictions. Communication during this early period is heavily monitored. Inmates' mail is read, phone calls are limited, and even gestures can be interpreted as threats. Many describe a pervasive sense of surveillance that leaves no space for privacy or self-expression. In essence, the intake process itself is a form of indoctrination. It teaches that every thought, action, and word will be observed, judged, and recorded. By the time the first week concludes, most inmates have begun to understand the harsh hierarchy of ADX. Guards are the ultimate authority, fellow inmates are distant and often hidden, and every decision, from when to sleep to when to eat, is dictated by the system. The physical design of the prison reinforces this lesson. Concrete walls, barred windows, and echoing corridors are not only security measures but psychological tools designed to reinforce the inmate's dependence on institutional structure. Several former inmates have reported that this initial indoctrination leaves a lasting impression. Some liken the experience to being systematically reprogrammed. The combination of isolation, constant surveillance, and behavioral conditioning instills a profound understanding of the consequences of defiance. While the process may appear administrative or procedural to outsiders, within the walls of ADX Florence, it is a carefully orchestrated psychological strategy. Even the smallest details are intentional. Cell dimensions, lighting schedules, and even the texture of the bedding contribute to the inmates' acclimatization. In interviews conducted by investigative journalists, former ADX inmates described the subtle ways the prison communicates authority. The constant hum of fluorescent lights serves as a reminder of the omnipresent surveillance. The routine of meal delivery and cell checks conditions them to respond predictably. In this way, ADX begins molding behavior long before any formal disciplinary action is necessary. By the end of the first week, many inmates report feelings of disorientation, anxiety, and hyper-awareness. They are acutely conscious of the omnipresent guards, cameras, and procedural rules. They learn quickly. Survival is not about strength alone, but compliance, observation, and the ability to navigate a system designed to suppress the self. The indoctrination of new inmates at ADX Florence is not a single event. It is an ongoing, methodical process that begins the moment the bus arrives. And for those entering the facility, it marks the first step into a world where liberty has ended, individuality is challenged, and every action is under scrutiny. Understanding this initial stage is essential to grasping the full scope of ADX's psychological control, a system that has been meticulously studied, debated, and criticized for decades. Conditioning the mind, solitude, routine, and control. As new inmates settle into their first weeks at ADX Florence, the true weight of the prison's psychological architecture begins to take hold. The facility is often described as a control experiment in human behavior. Every sound, every movement, every interaction carefully designed to condition inmates to the rules of the Supermax system. Here, survival is not measured by physical strength or intimidation, but by adaptability, vigilance, and the ability to internalize institutional authority. One of the earliest and most potent tools of indoctrination is solitary confinement. Unlike many federal facilities where inmates may spend the majority of their time in communal areas, ADX employs long-term isolation as a primary method of behavior management. Most new inmates are initially placed in single-occupancy cells, sometimes referred to as treatment cells, where they remain for 23 hours a day. This confinement is not a punishment for misbehavior. It is the default state for new arrivals. The cells themselves are designed for both security and psychological influence. Measuring approximately 7 by 12 feet, the space is minimally furnished. A reinforced steel bed, a stainless steel sink-toilet combination, and a small, narrow window with a view of concrete walls and razor wire. The lighting is artificial, operating on a strict schedule, and the acoustics amplify every creak of the building, every clang of a door, every echo of footsteps down the hall. Inmates report that these conditions create a sensory environment where perception of time and space becomes distorted, a state psychologists call temporal disorientation, which ADX uses deliberately to heighten the inmate's dependence on institutional cues. Daily routines are meticulously structured. Inmates are escorted to limited recreation spaces, often alone or under constant observation. Meals are delivered through cell slots, removing the social and sensory aspects of dining. Even the most mundane tasks, brushing teeth, exercising, or reading, are performed within a framework of surveillance and procedural expectation. This regimented environment reinforces a psychological message. Freedom of choice has been replaced by the structured order of the institution, and deviation from the rules will be immediately noted and addressed. Communication is a controlled variable. From the outset, inmates are informed that their conversations, gestures, and written correspondence are under constant scrutiny. Mail is reviewed, phone privileges are restricted. Verbal communication within the cell block is discouraged, monitored, or forbidden. This systematic limitation of social interaction serves a dual purpose. It reduces the risk of gang coordination or escape planning, and fosters a dependency on the rules, routines, and authority figures established by the facility. Despite the isolation, Social dynamics cue. Whitley emerge. Inmates are highly observant, attuned to subtle cues that indicate power, hierarchy, or threat. Eye contact, body language, and reaction to guard instructions are constantly interpreted. Even without direct contact, the behavior of fellow inmates can influence one's own survival strategy. According to interviews with former ADX prisoners, understanding these dynamics, which inmates pose threats, which are cooperative, and which are unpredictable, becomes a critical skill in navigating the early weeks of confinement. Behavioral assessments continue throughout this period. Psychologists and correctional staff regularly evaluate inmates' responses to isolation, stress, and routine. Notes are meticulously recorded in case files, and these records influence future decisions regarding cell placement, privileges, and monitoring. In this way, each new inmate is gradually mapped, their psychological profile carefully cataloged, creating a feedback loop where the system adapts to the individual as much as the individual adapts to the system. The use of fear as a conditioning tool is another subtle but powerful aspect. Guards enforce strict protocols with unwavering consistency. Doors are slammed, lights flicker, alarms sound without warning, and the constant presence of surveillance cameras communicates that no action is unseen. Even in the absence of direct punishment, the threat of potential consequences instills a pervasive sense of vigilance. Former inmates describe an environment where the line between routine and intimidation blurs, making them hyper-aware of every gesture, word, and thought. ADX Florence also implements incremental exposure to rules and consequences. New inmates quickly learn the meaning of phrases like Tier 1 security, step-down program, or administrative segregation, and they experience firsthand the repercussions of violations. For instance, talking during a designated quiet period may lead to extended isolation. Failure to follow cell movement protocols can result in immediate disciplinary reports. Each experience reinforces the understanding that compliance is not optional. It is survival. Interestingly, even limited human contact is a tool of indoctrination. Correctional officers are trained to interact with inmates in ways that assert dominance while minimizing personal connection. Every conversation, every escort, every inspection is performed with a deliberate tone and pace. The goal is to communicate authority through subtle behavioral cues, teaching inmates to anticipate and respect the boundaries imposed by the system. By the end of the second week, many new arrivals report an altered perception of their environment and themselves. The constant exposure to isolation, routine, and observation has a cumulative effect. Anxiety levels rise, dependence on institutional structure deepens, and resistance to authority diminishes. In this way, ADX Florence not only confines the body, but methodically shapes the mind, preparing inmates for the extended period of control that defines life inside America's most secure federal prison. Former inmates often describe this early period as psychological conditioning at its most precise and relentless. The goal is not simply to punish or contain, but to mold behavior and mindset, a process that begins immediately upon arrival and continues for years. Each cell, each routine, each monitored interaction is part of a carefully orchestrated system designed to maintain order, mitigate risk, and assert institutional control over every facet of an inmate's existence. ADX. Florence remains one of the most secretive and controlled prisons in the world. The unseen indoctrination of new inmates reveals just how far the system goes to shape minds behind bars. If you found this eye-opening, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true crime revelations.